The debate on whether or not obesity should be considered a disability is still an ongoing topic in today's world. Obesity is a prevalent condition that affects 1 in 6 adults in the United States. However, the classification of obesity comes with many different viewpoints. Legally speaking, though, obesity is not a disability and is regarded as or considered a disease by definition. What is obesity? Well, according to Covington, who's a medical doctor, obesity is defined as a chronic, relapsing, multifactorial neurobehavioral disease wherein an increase in body fat promotes adipose tissue dysfunction and abnormal fat mass, physical forces, resulting in adverse metabolic, biomechanical, and psychosocial health consequences. And to put it in simpler terms, it would be a chronic disease that's defined as a range of weight that's greater than what is considered healthy for a given height. And this goes into BMIs. Disease or disability? Well, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, a chronic disease is defined as a condition that lasts 1 year or more and requires medical attention or limits activities of daily living or both. So back in 1948, the World Health Organization, or WHO, they first recognized obesity as a disease rather than a disability. And even in 2013, the AMA, the American Medical Association, they designated obesity as a disease, which then kind of resulted to this idea that obesity was caused more by insufficient willpower, lack of discipline, and bad choices. So obesity is recognized by several organizations as a chronic and complex disease. Obesity is considered a disease or this condition that can lead to or significantly increase your risk for developing other chronic diseases, and this can go into heart disease, type 2 diabetes, some cancers, hypertension, osteoarthritis, and etc. So when looking at it from a broader perspective, you can see the rippling effect that obesity causes.
From a legal perspective, obesity should not be considered as a disability because it does not clearly meet the specifications highlighted in the legal definition of a disability. According to the ADA, a disability is defined as a mental or physical impairment which has substantial limits affecting an individual's major life activities, presence of records demonstrating that impairment, or an individual being regarded to have that impairment. Quoted, in the absence of a substantial limitation resulting from obesity or an employer who regards obese workers as substantially limited, the ADA does not protect an obese worker who experiences an adverse employment action on the basis of. Therefore, from this legal approach, obesity cannot be expressed as a disability and a subject of protection by laws for safeguarding people with disabilities.
Without evidence of an underlying physiological disorder or condition, extreme obesity is not an impairment under the ADA, according to the 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. Those at risk for obesity are children and adults with mobility limitations and intellectual or learning disabilities. So therefore, the ones who are already considered disabled by other means are the ones who have the greatest risk for being or becoming obese. Congress amended the ADA in 2008, adding this regarded as component to the disability discrimination, which provides obese plaintiffs a greater opportunity for success in disability discrimination claims. But jurisdictions differ on the extent to which obesity is considered a disability under the ADA as amended.
This case is Cook versus Rhode Island Department of Mental Health. The plaintiff had reapplied for a job she previously had. She was 5'2" in height and weighed over 320 pounds at the time of her reapplication. The state had refused to hire her because they believed that her morbid obesity would interfere with her ability to perform her job and would make her a threat to the health and safety of others. The plaintiff sued under the 504 Rehabilitation Act, and the state asserted that plaintiff's conditions was not an immutable one and therefore was not an impairment under the act, and that the plaintiff's conditions was voluntary. After a battle back and forth, the court found that the state discriminated against the plaintiff on the basis of disability under the 504 Rehabilitation Act. This next case is Powell versus Gentiva Health Services. She testified that she was overweight, exercised regularly, and had no limiting or health conditions resulting from her obesity. She claims that her performance at work was not impacted by her obesity at all. Despite the plaintiff being obese, all her claims did not meet the specification in the definition of disability according to the ADA. Eventually, Alabama District Court dismissed the case on the plaintiff on her obesity as a disability based on ADA liability.
So I decided to go over 3 different cases over obesity not being considered disability under the court's eyes. So the first one is going to be Morris versus BNSF Railway Company. That was a case in 2016 in Nebraska. And this man, obese person, sued the railway company due to his weight. Now, he had applied for the job, wanted to be a machinist with them, and he took 2 examinations and ended up failing them because due to his BMI being more than 40. Now, BNSF policy would not hire someone over 40 BMI for safety-sensitive positions. So Morris took him to court for discrimination due to his disability of being obese. Now, the court denied him because he had not alleged a physical impairment. And without an impairment, Morris could not be actually disabled or regarded as disabled. So Morris ended up losing the case. The second case would be obese man versus New Jersey Bus Company. Now, this 500-pound man had worked for this company for a while, but they ended up letting him go. And so he felt that he was being discriminated by them. He took that company to court claiming he was subject to a hostile work environment because of his obesity under the state's law against discrimination, which is the LAD. Now, the court responded by saying that obesity does not fall under as a disability under the LAD, and that his employer did not treat him differently because of it. So the man lost the case too. Now, the last case that I wrote about is Baltheria versus Medtronic. Now, as Jose ended up getting let go due to report falsification. But what originally started is that he was going to go on vacation. So on his last day of work, they gave him 12 tasks. And so he completed, he reported on the computer that he finished it, and then he went on his way and then went on vacation. But the company was like, how did he do that all in one day? That's impossible. So they called him and asked him, like, hey, did you really finish those 12 tasks? And he's like, you know what, I didn't. So they let him go, and he got upset. So he sued them for disability bias, arguing that he was dismissed because of his morbid obesity. So he took him to court, and Medtronic ended up winning the case because obesity isn't considered a disability under the ADA, and he got fired due to report falsification, not because of his weight. So Jose lost the case. Thank you so much.
States versus federal laws regarding disabilities. State laws and federal laws regarding disabilities are different. This is because they are separated and work at different levels. However, most state laws use the ADA as a baseline for making their laws. This shows a unification in wanting to protect disabled individuals from discrimination. And since the ADA does not explicitly define what a disability is, this makes the courts have to evaluate each case independently. Why it is important that obesity stays a disease. With the largely growing amount of obese people in the world, it is important that obesity is not labeled a disability legally. If suddenly a large amount of population was labeled as having a disability, imagine the amount it would cost for treatment, because many of these treatments would involve drugs, clinical visits, and often surgical intervention. This would ultimately lead others who are obese to other treatment options that aren't looking at the underlying cause of why they are obese, while also discouraging lower income families from changing lifestyle habits.
Following everything, the last 2 slides talk about ways to prevent obesity. Harvard School of Public Health researched that physical activity is a source that can prevent obesity. They mention how physical activity can burn calories, decrease fat around waist, and total body fat. They mention how weightlifting and other muscle strengthening builds muscle mass and how physical activity motivates individuals. The CDC as well mentions how eating healthy foods such as high meats and seafood along with others on my slide, and how exercising daily prevents obesity. And lastly, seeing your primary care provider for preventive checkups to track weight. With all being said, my group and I strongly agree that obesity is not a disability. Thank you.